Most people think the greatest danger on a road trip is getting lost. Maybe your car breaks down. Maybe you run out of gas. Maybe you're stranded for a few hours waiting for help. But sometimes, the person who stops to help is the very reason you never make it home. This is the true story of British backpacker Peter Falconio and his girlfriend, Joan Lees, a journey through the Australian outback that turned into one of the country's most chilling travel horror stories. In the summer of 2001, Peter Falconio was 28 years old. Like thousands of young travelers from Europe, he had dreamed of exploring Australia. The country promised endless beaches, unique wildlife, and roads that stretched farther than the eye could see. He and his girlfriend, Joan Lees, had spent months traveling together. They had visited cities, camped under the stars, and driven across some of the most beautiful landscapes on Earth. Their next destination was Darwin. To get there, they needed to travel along the Stuart Highway, a road famous for its isolation. The Stuart Highway cuts through the heart of Australia. For hundreds of miles, there's almost nothing. No neighborhoods, no streets, no towns for hours at a time. Just asphalt disappearing into the horizon. During the day, the desert is breathtaking. At night, it's another world entirely. Once the sun disappears, the darkness is overwhelming. Without city lights, the sky becomes a blanket of stars. Beautiful, but terrifying, because if something happens out there, help may be hours away. On the evening of July 14th, Peter and Joanne were driving north in their orange Volkswagen Combi van. They had spent the day sightseeing and weren't in any hurry. The weather was calm. Traffic was light. Everything seemed perfectly normal. As darkness settled over the desert, they continued driving. Then they noticed headlights behind them. A white utility truck. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The truck stayed behind them for several minutes before pulling alongside. The driver rolled down his window. He shouted something, but Peter couldn't hear him clearly. The stranger pointed toward the back of the van. He motioned frantically. Peter slowed down. The truck driver pulled in front and stopped. Peter parked behind him. The stranger stepped out. He appeared friendly. He told Peter that sparks had been shooting out from underneath the van. In the middle of nowhere, that was a serious warning. If something underneath the vehicle was dragging against the road, it could start a fire. Peter thanked the man and walked toward the rear of the van to take a look. Joan stayed inside. She watched through the windshield. The two men disappeared behind the vehicle. Only seconds passed. Then, a single gunshot shattered the silence. Joan froze. For a moment, her mind refused to believe what she had heard. Then the stranger appeared again. Only this time, he was holding a rifle. He pointed it directly at Joanne. He ordered her out of the van. Terrified, she obeyed. The man bound her wrists with plastic cable ties. He forced her toward his truck. Every instinct told her the truth. If she got inside that vehicle, she would never come back out. As the attacker walked around to open the passenger door, Joanne made the most important decision of her life. She ran. She sprinted into the darkness beside the highway, without looking back. The desert swallowed her almost instantly. The ground was uneven. Sharp rocks cut in her bare feet. Bushes tore out her clothes. Behind her, she heard shouting. Then footsteps. The attacker was chasing her. Joanne dove into thick scrub and pressed herself against the ground. She didn't dare breathe. The flashlight beam swept across the bushes only yards away. She could hear the man's boots crunching across the dry earth. He searched slowly, methodically, calling out, listening, waiting for any sound that would reveal where she was hiding. Joanne later said she believed she was going to die. She lay completely still while mosquitoes covered her face and arms. She didn't swat them away. She didn't move. Minutes felt like hours. Then she heard a vehicle door slam. An engine started. The truck drove away. But Joanne still didn't move. She was terrified that it was a trick. She believed the man might park farther down the road and come back on foot. So she remained hidden. 1 hour passed. Then another. The Australian desert grew colder. Every strange sound made her heart race. Finally, after several hours, she cautiously crawled toward the highway. She stood in the darkness, hoping another vehicle would appear. Eventually, headlights emerged in the distance. She waved desperately. The driver stopped. Joanne was shaking uncontrollably. She told them someone had shot her boyfriend. Police were called immediately. Within hours, officers arrived at the scene. But Peter Falconio was gone. The van remained on the roadside. Blood evidence suggested Peter had been shot near the rear of the vehicle. Yet his body had vanished. Investigators searched the surrounding desert. They searched from the ground. They searched from the air. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Nothing. No body. No weapon. No sign of Peter. It was as though the outback had swallowed him whole. As investigators pieced together Joanne's account, some people questioned her story. The isolation of the highway, the lack of witnesses, and Peter's missing body fueled speculation. But forensic evidence from the van supported her description of the attack. The investigation eventually focused on a man named Bradley John Murdoch. DNA evidence connected him to the crime scene. In 2005, Murdoch was convicted of Peter Falconio's murder and the attempted kidnapping of Joanne Lees. Despite the conviction, one haunting mystery remains unsolved. Peter Falconio's body has never been found. More than 2 decades later, the Australian outback still keeps that secret. The endless desert is vast enough to hide almost anything. And somewhere beyond those lonely highways, Peter's final resting place remains unknown. For travelers, the case changed the way many people viewed long-distance road trips through isolated regions. It reminded everyone that danger doesn't always come in the form of bad weather or mechanical failure. Sometimes it arrives wearing a friendly smile. Sometimes it offers help. Sometimes it convinces you to step out of your vehicle for just a few seconds. Those few seconds were all it took to change 2 lives forever. Joanne survived because she made one impossible decision. She ran into complete darkness. She chose the unknown over the man with the gun. It was a gamble that saved her life. Peter never had that chance. Even today, thousands of travelers drive the Stewart Highway every year. Most complete the journey without incident. But every so often, as night falls over the endless Australian desert, someone remembers the story of the backpacker who pulled over to inspect a problem with his van and was never seen again. Every year, millions of people visit America's national parks. They come to admire breathtaking landscapes, hike scenic trails, and experience nature at its most beautiful. Most leave with unforgettable memories, but a few never leave at all. Some disappear without a trace. Others are found only after nature has erased nearly every clue. This is the true story of the German family who entered Death Valley National Park on what should have been the vacation of a lifetime, and whose final journey became one of the most haunting travel mysteries in American history. In the summer of 1996, the Rimkus family traveled from Germany to the United States. The family consisted of Egbert Rimkus, his wife Cornelia, their 4-year-old son George, and Cornelia's 11-year-old son Max. Like many tourists visiting America for the first time, they dreamed of seeing the country's most famous natural wonders. They rented a green Plymouth Voyager minivan and began driving through California and the American Southwest. Their vacation had gone smoothly. They had visited several tourist destinations and photographed the incredible scenery. Friends and relatives back home had no reason to worry. The family seemed happy. Their next stop was one of the hottest places on Earth, Death Valley National Park. Despite its frightening name, the park attracts more than 1 million visitors every year. Towering mountains surround endless deserts. Salt flats stretch for miles. But beneath that beauty lies incredible danger. Summer temperatures regularly climb above 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The ground itself can become hot enough to burn exposed skin. A person stranded without water can die within hours. Park rangers constantly warn visitors of one simple rule: stay on the main roads. The Rimkus family unknowingly broke that rule. No one knows exactly why. Perhaps they wanted to explore. Perhaps they trusted an outdated paper map. Perhaps they simply made one wrong turn. Whatever the reason, they left the paved highway and drove onto a remote mining road called Anvil Canyon Road. Unlike the main highways, these dirt roads receive very little traffic. Some are so isolated that days can pass without another vehicle appearing. As they continued deeper into the desert, civilization disappeared behind them. No gas stations, no ranger stations, no phone service, only mountains, rocks, and endless silence. Eventually, disaster struck. Their rented minivan became stuck. The rough terrain damaged the vehicle, making it impossible to continue. They were stranded. Today, experts say the safest decision in that situation is usually to stay with the vehicle. Cars are much easier for rescue teams to locate than people. They also provide shade from the deadly sun. But investigators believe the family decided to leave on foot. Maybe they thought help was nearby. Maybe they believed another road was only a short walk away. Maybe they underestimated just how enormous Death Valley really is. Whatever their reasoning, it would become a fatal decision. Days passed. No one reported seeing the family. No emergency call ever came. Eventually, the rental company reported the minivan overdue. Search teams began looking for the missing tourists. The abandoned vehicle was finally discovered. It sat alone in the middle of nowhere. Inside were personal belongings, maps, food, suitcases. Everything suggested the family had planned to return. There was no indication they intended to abandon the vehicle forever. But they were gone. The search expanded. Helicopters flew over miles of desert. Ground crews searched canyons and mountain trails. Nothing. It was as though the desert had swallowed 4 people without leaving a trace. Months turned into years. The case slowly grew cold. Many believed the family would never be found. Then, in 2009, more than 13 years after they vanished, experienced hikers made a disturbing discovery. Human remains. The location was deep within the desert, several miles from where the van had been abandoned. Investigators eventually identified the remains as members of the Rimkus family. The discovery answered one question, but it raised many others. Why had they walked so far? Why hadn't they stayed with the vehicle? Had they been searching for help? Or had they become hopelessly lost? Search and rescue experts later studied the terrain. The route the family appears to have taken crossed steep mountain passes covered with loose rock. Even experienced hikers described the area as extremely dangerous. Temperatures during the day would have been unbearable. Water supplies would have disappeared quickly. Every step farther from the vehicle made survival less likely. One heartbreaking detail still stands out. Little George was only 4 years old. Imagine carrying a child through blazing desert heat. Imagine watching your water disappear while the nearest road remained miles away. Imagine realizing that every direction looked exactly the same. The desert offers almost no landmarks. Mountains seem close, but may actually be dozens of miles away. Mirages create the illusion of water that doesn't exist. Even trained hikers have become disoriented. For tourists unfamiliar with the environment, survival becomes almost impossible. Years after the case, experienced off-road explorers retraced parts of the family's likely route. Many admitted they struggled even with modern GPS equipment. Some became lost despite knowing exactly where they were supposed to go. The story became a powerful reminder that nature doesn't need monsters to become terrifying. Sometimes the environment itself is enough. Death Valley earned its name long before national parks existed. During the California Gold Rush, pioneers attempting to cross the region died from heat, thirst, and exhaustion. One survivor reportedly looked back across the desert and said, "Goodbye, Death Valley." The name remained. Today, park rangers rescue stranded visitors every year. Some survive only because help arrives in time. Others are found after it's too late. Modern technology has reduced the danger. GPS devices, satellite communicators, emergency locator beacons. Yet despite all of those tools, people continue to underestimate the desert. They assume water is nearby. They assume another traveler will appear. They assume they can simply walk to safety. The Rimkus family's tragedy proves how deadly those assumptions can be. Their story isn't one of crime. There was no killer hiding in the desert. No misterio extraño. No supernatural force. Their enemy was distance, heat, dehydration, isolation, nature itself, and sometimes Nature is the most terrifying force of all. Even today, visitors driving through Death Valley pass warning signs every few miles. They advise travelers to carry extra water. Stay with your vehicle. Avoid remote roads. Many people read those signs without thinking twice. But hidden among those mountains is the memory of one family who never made it home. A family who came searching for adventure. A family who believed they had plenty of time. A family who unknowingly took one wrong turn. Their vacation began with excitement, photographs, and dreams of exploring America. It ended in one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. And more than 2 decades later, their final journey remains one of the most chilling travel horror stories ever documented. Because sometimes, the most dangerous place you'll ever visit isn't haunted. It's simply too far away for anyone to hear you call for help. There are stories that remain unsolved because evidence disappears. And then there are stories where investigators find plenty of evidence. But none of it makes any sense. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night inside a tent on a freezing mountain. The temperature is nearly 40 degrees below zero. Outside is nothing but darkness, snow, and deadly wind. Your tent is the only thing keeping you alive. Yet somehow, you become so terrified that you slash your own tent open from the inside and run into the snow wearing little more than your underwear. That is exactly what happened in one of the most famous travel mysteries in history. This is the true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. It was January 1959. 9 experienced hikers from the Soviet Union set out on what was supposed to be a challenging but achievable winter expedition through the northern Ural Mountains. They weren't beginners. Most were university students or recent graduates with extensive experience in skiing, mountaineering, and surviving brutal winter conditions. The leader of the group was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. He carefully planned every detail of the expedition. The route was classified as Category 3, the highest difficulty rating available at the time. Completing it would earn the hikers advanced certification in wilderness travel. The group originally consisted of 10 people, but just a few days into the journey, one member, Yuri Yudin, became ill. He suffered severe joint pain and realized he couldn't continue. Reluctantly, he turned back. At the time, he believed he had simply been unlucky. Instead, that decision saved his life. The remaining 9 hikers continued deeper into the mountains. They kept journals throughout the trip. They took photographs almost every day. The pictures showed smiling faces, snow-covered forests, campfires, friends laughing together despite the freezing temperatures. Nothing suggested anything was wrong. Then came February 1st. The group reached the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl. The mountain's name, translated from the local Mansi language, means dead mountain. Because of worsening weather and poor visibility, the hikers decided to pitch their tent directly on the exposed mountainside rather than continue into the nearby forest. It wasn't the ideal location. Strong winds swept across the open slope, but they expected to continue the next morning. No one knows exactly what happened that night, because no one survived to tell the story. When the group failed to return on schedule, relatives became concerned. Search parties were organized. At first, rescuers assumed the hikers had simply been delayed by weather. But as days turned into weeks, the situation became increasingly alarming. Finally, on February 26th, rescuers located the campsite. The scene they found would become one of the strangest crime scenes in history. The tent was still standing. It had partially collapsed under snow. Inside were backpacks, warm clothing, food, boots, almost everything the hikers needed to survive. But the most shocking detail was impossible to ignore. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. Instead of leaving through the entrance, the hikers had cut their own escape route. Why? What could possibly frighten experienced mountaineers enough to abandon their shelter in sub-zero temperatures? Investigators followed footprints leading away from the tent. The prints showed that the hikers had not sprinted wildly. Instead, many appeared to have walked calmly down the mountain. Some were barefoot. Others were only socks. A few had a single boot. None were dressed for survival. About a mile away, beneath a large cedar tree, rescuers discovered the first two bodies. They belonged to Yuri Krivonischenko and Yuri Doroshenko. Both men wore almost no clothing. Nearby were the remains of a small campfire. The tree itself had broken branches nearly 15 feet above the ground. Investigators believed one or both men had climbed it. But why? Were they trying to look back toward the tent? Or were they trying to escape something on the ground? The mystery only deepened. Several hundred yards between the cedar tree and the abandoned tent, 3 more bodies were found. One belonged to Igor Dyatlov, another to Zinaida Kolmogorova. The third was Rustam Slobodin. Their positions suggested they had been trying to return to the tent. They never made it. It seemed as though the group had split up. Some stayed near the fire. Others desperately attempted to reach their shelter again. Weeks later, after the snow began melting, search teams found the remaining 4 hikers buried beneath several feet of snow inside a nearby ravine. Their injuries shocked investigators. One man had multiple crushed ribs. Another suffered a fractured skull. A woman, Ludmila Dubinina, was missing her tongue. Several ribs had been broken with tremendous force. Yet strangely, there were almost no external wounds. Doctors compared the injuries to those seen in serious car crashes. Whatever had caused them had applied enormous pressure. Investigators searched for evidence of another group. Nothing that no signs of struggle. No footprints except those belonging to the hikers. No indication that another person had been present. The official Soviet investigation reached a vague conclusion. The hikers had died because of an unknown compelling force. Those 4 words only fueled decades of speculation. Some believed they had encountered escaped prisoners. Others blamed secret military experiments. There were theories involving avalanches, infrasound, yetis, and even extraterrestrials. One particularly strange detail encouraged the rumors. Some clothing tested positive for elevated levels of radiation. No explanation satisfied everyone. For decades, the Dyatlov Pass incident remained one of the world's greatest mysteries. Then, more than 60 years later, scientists revisited the case. Using modern computer simulations and snow movement models, researchers proposed a new explanation: a small slab avalanche. Unlike massive avalanches shown in movies, a slab avalanche can occur quietly. A heavy block of snow can slowly slide onto a tent hours after campers settle inside. The hikers may have believed a larger avalanche was about to follow. That could explain why they immediately cut through the tent instead of wasting precious seconds using the entrance. They fled downhill into the trees, hoping to wait until the danger passed. But in the darkness, without proper clothing, without boots, the freezing temperatures quickly became deadly. Some likely died from hypothermia. Others may have fallen into the ravine, explaining the devastating internal injuries. Even so, not every mystery has been answered. Why were some bodies wearing other hikers' clothes? Exactly how was Ludmila's tongue lost? Why did the groups separate? Could they have returned to the tent if they had stayed together? No one knows. Yuri Yudin, the only member who turned back before the expedition, spent the rest of his life wondering why his friends never returned. He visited the memorial dedicated to them many times. Until his own death, he hoped someone would finally explain what happened on that mountain. Today, hikers still visit Dyatlov Pass. The landscape looks peaceful. Snow-covered ridges stretch endlessly toward the horizon. But every winter, the story returns. 9 experienced adventurers, 1 freezing night, a tent cut open from the inside, and a mystery that continues to haunt the world. Because sometimes, the scariest horror stories don't involve ghosts. They involve ordinary people who made one final decision: